Hello and welcome to this masterclass from KU Leuven. Our topic today is sacred spaces in the Catholic school, or more specifically, sacred spaces in the Catholic Dialogue School, a school of diversity, encountering differences, and how to create architecturally sacred spaces that meet that diversity and difference framed by the Catholic tradition and in interaction with the Catholic theological tradition. All of you are very welcomed in this masterclass today. I will just ask you here to please keep your microphone on mute. That helps with the recording in the background. And I'll advise you that this masterclass is being recorded for the benefit of those who are unable to attend today, so that you should know your camera on indicates your consent to be recorded. If you would not like to be recorded visually, you can simply just turn your camera off. I'll also invite you throughout this masterclass to enter your questions or remarks in the chat. While the presenters are speaking during the class, I'll be monitoring the chat and be able to pull questions out for the time that remains at the end of the masterclass. We will not pause to take questions during the middle portion of the class, but I'll gather questions for the time that remains at the end. So you can enter those in the chat at any time you like. Can I just invite someone, please, to enter into the chat a confirmation that you can see us and hear us clearly? Fantastic. Thank you very much. And now with that, I would like to introduce your two teachers for this masterclass. You have here Professor Didier Pollefeyt, a Belgian Catholic theologian, full professor here at the Catholic University of Leuven. He's director of the research group on enhancing Catholic school identity and the supervisor of Thomas, the website for religious education practitioners in Flanders, sponsored by the Belgian Bishops' Conference. And from 2013 to 2017, Professor Pollefeyt served as Vice President for Educational Policy here at KU Leuven. Joining Professor Pollefeyt is Jan Bouwens. Jan has been with the ECSI research group since 2007, and to this day he holds the position of Chief Academic Researcher for the Enhancing Catholic School Identity Project at the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies, and he prepares a PhD on the same topic. So with that, I invite you to join us, Jan and Professor Pollefeyt.
Greetings from KU Leuven in the heart of Europe, and we are happy to present to you a new masterclass on sacred spaces in the Catholic Dialogue School. And here is your menu for this lecture. After a short introduction, we will present to you 6 different models to look or to create sacred spaces. We will evaluate them from an ECSI perspective, and we will end this session with some recommendations for the future if you like to work on your own sacred spaces in your schools in Australia. But Jan first will give an introduction about constructing and reconstructing churches, in this case the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris.
So good afternoon, Australia. My name is Jan Bouwens. Today we'll talk about sacred places and sacred spaces in Catholic schools and beyond. One of the ultimate sacred places in the world is the Notre Dame Cathedral in the heart of Paris. And as you all know, in April 2019, unfortunately, the building caught on fire. The world was watching in horror when the medieval wooden structure of the roof and the iconic spire collapsed and fell down inside. The fire, the smoke, the water destroyed the interior. Everything was gone. Except the actual stone structure, the firefighters were able to save that. Immediately, President Macron from France announced that they were going to rebuild the Notre Dame in a record time, in 5 years' time, before the 2024 Olympic Games. For that, they had a crowdfunding campaign, and an astonishing amount of 840 million euros was collected, all private money, to do the renovation. The Prime Minister said there will be a competition for architects and designers as to what the new construction and the interior of the Notre Dame would look like. Because this, of course, is a golden opportunity to innovate, to renovate, instead of just to restore. So there were all kinds of proposals, some serious proposals, like a glass roof in the shape of a diamond, as you can see on the screen, or stained glasses all the way on the roof and the spire, or a green roof on the glass, a public park that is open to the public without a roof, or an elegant recontextualization of the original roof, also with green plants inside, to some more questionable ideas, as you can see here. Serious or not, this is a serious proposal. It's a strange object that they propose to construct on top of the roof. Or this one, you may have come across some of these on social media and in the newspaper. Some more jokingly proposed to put the roof to some public use, like a swimming pool. And if the North Americans would have been in charge of the renovation, it might have come out like this: a launching pad for a rocket, a space rocket, or even the parking lot for to solve the parking problem in the busy city of Paris. So they're still working on the outside, but the inside was also horribly destroyed by the fire. And a lot of debate has been going on in the past years of people, architects, politicians, church officials, who made proposals to revamp the interior of the cathedral with contemporary art, a museum, a projection of Bible quotes, a sound and light trail among the side chapels, and so on. Others said, no, you should keep it intact and restore it to its original shape and content and style, and don't change it anything. So how can this be approached? That's what we'll talk about today. How to construct and refurbish sacred spaces in schools, in the Catholic Dialogue School more particularly. In December last year, the interior was reopened to the public with a big ceremony, as you saw on television. What did they do with it, the French? Did they restore it, rediscover it, renew it, recontextualize it perhaps? We haven't been there ourselves. We would like to go soon and discover it for ourselves, what happened there, what kind of combination of the different models is taking place there. So I leave the question open for you, but after this presentation this morning, this afternoon, you'll be in a much better position to make your own judgment about what happened to the Notre Dame in Paris. With that being said, so this diagram is very familiar to you. You're going to need it. We will refer to it regularly when we explain our different positions and unfold our typology of different kinds of sacred spaces from an architectural point of view. The what, the how, the when, the who, and especially the why of the sacred spaces in our schools.
Thank you, Jan, for that introduction. I'll just pause here to remind everybody that you are very welcome to be here today. Please keep your microphone on mute for the benefit of our recording. Just as a reminder to those who entered a bit late, your camera on indicates your consent to be recorded. If you don't wish to be recorded, you can put your camera off. And as a final reminder to everybody, you're welcome to enter questions and remarks in the chat at any time during the presentation. I'll monitor that chat and pull out some questions during the time that remains at the end for questions. Thank you. Back to you, Jan.
Michael. Thank you.
So the main idea of this masterclass is that the way that you construct your sacred spaces at school reflect also a certain understanding of the identity of a Catholic school. If you would imagine about your sacred space and you describe it to us, we could tell what kind of Catholic school you have in mind. And the other way around, if you want to construct a certain identity for your Catholic school, it can be supported by a certain construction of your sacred space at school. So what we will do is present to you now 6 different models to construct a sacred space today. And we will evaluate each of these models from an ECSI perspective. And you see already the 6 models here in front of you, most of them having even 2 different subtypes. And you can see we have also created icons for each of them. One Catholic school chapel, no sacred space at school, working with an empty space, creating what is very popular today, one multifunctional space. A 5th model is working with multiple sacred spaces. And finally, you could also construct one Catholic hermeneutical sacred space. And you see the golden dot appearing. The 6th model is the model that we would suggest from the perspective of a Catholic dialogue school, as will become clear in this lecture. So that's how we will proceed, model by model, and then giving examples for each model, and then criticizing each of these models. At the end, you will have an idea of different possibilities and what they reflect about its presuppositions concerning its Catholic identity. So that's how we will proceed. Before we go to that, it's important to make an important distinction between what we call Catholic sacred places and Catholic sacred spaces, which is not the same, especially from a canonical point of view. A Catholic sacred place is in fact a place that is canonically erected with a decision of the bishop, with the purpose of Catholic worship. And mostly it is in Catholic schools an oratory, or what we often call a school chapel, and it's governed by the canon laws, as you can see, numbers 1205 until 1243. It has a special regulation if you create a Catholic sacred place. Next to that, we speak about Catholic sacred spaces, which is a much broader concept. These are all designated areas that you use, set apart from the normal classrooms, the normal educational spaces, that support students and staff in their spiritual formation, where you can do prayer, worship, reflect on the Catholic faith tradition. And they could also be manifestations, physical manifestations of the school's Catholic identity, but it's not so strictly regulated as is the case for Catholic sacred places. It's important to know that not all Catholic sacred spaces are also Catholic sacred places. And for sacred places, you do not necessarily need to have a kind of formally dedicated or consecrated or blessed room, as is the case for Catholic sacred places. You have more space to work creatively in spaces than in Catholic sacred places. It's important to know that distinction at the background of this presentation. We now go immediately to the first model, which is the traditional model, as we all know it, of the Catholic school chapel, reflecting a mono-religious Catholic liturgical space. You can see in the icon, it's in fact the church present in the school. It's a dedicated, consecrated oratory or school chapel, which reflects in fact the possibility to have a mono-religious Catholic liturgical praxis at school. And on the right side, you see the Melbourne scale and the Victoria scale. It's in fact coming from a more monological perspective in the Victoria scale. If you look in the Melbourne scale, this kind of traditional chapel that is designed exclusively for Catholic worship, through its layout, its decoration, its symbols, its artwork, can reflect the confessionality of the school or a dynamic of reconfessionalization. So in fact, in that first model, you have two subtypes or two variations. You have the confessional variant, and as you know, confessionality means the presence of the Catholic identity coming from the past, historically. And many schools have such a traditional old Catholic chapel. The second variation is, of this first model is what we call reconfessionalization. That means you rebuild, you reconstruct a new chapel in the school, but based on the same mono-religious approach as was the case in the past with the confessional model. So two subvariants, and that's the reason why in the Melbourne scale you see that it's both including confessionality and reconfessionalization. Jan has some examples of this.
Indeed, I have numerous examples with each of the models. Here is a classical example of a confessional Model 1 school chapel from the 1950s in a big girls' college here in Flanders before the Second Vatican Council. You're all familiar with these places from your childhood or from the present, perhaps. By the way, what happened to this room over the years? In 2010, we photographed the same room 60 years later, and it had turned into a cafeteria, as you can see here. The school still has a sacred place elsewhere, but this room was needed for the lunch breaks. That's an example of secularization. Here's an example from the United States of a confessional sacred place, a school chapel in one of the oldest girls' colleges in the US that was renovated in 2017 into this. It's the same room. The ceiling is higher again. We see the windows. It has turned 90 degrees. It looks very bright, very modern, nice colors, nice and clean, but still as confessional as it used to be. It's not because something looks modern that is also recontextualized or post-critical.
So that's the movement that we see from confessionality to reconfessionalization. But each time the target group is the same. It's the entire school population. And one presupposes that it consists of faithful and practicing Catholics as much as possible. And the intention is that the others, the non-Catholics, to the extent that they are present in the school, also adapt to this school's Catholic preferential option and its missionizing power. So it could be a strategy to reconfessionalize the school.
Here are some examples of this. Looks familiar to you as well. From the UK and the US, we see school chapels, sometimes parish churches located closely to the school or on the school ground or in the vicinity that the school uses for its Catholic worship. There is a priest that welcomes the children to initiate them in the Catholic faith tradition. Here's another example of a famous, very big chapel in the Philippines. Sorry, in Florida, US. It was given to us by a Filipino student. It's a huge hall of 950 seats to be used as a reconfessionalizing chapel in the US. Here's another example of a room in the Diocesan Catholic Education Office in Antwerp. We researched their identity and they did not have a sacred space. And one of our recommendations was to erect one. So they transformed this storage room into a sacred space that happened to be one of Model 1 reconfessionalizing. So that change, that movement exists as well. Another interesting example from Vietnam. One of our international students gave us this picture of the same room that was renovated before on the left and after the renovation on the right. And in fact, I must admit that the situation before was more recontextualized than the renovation afterwards. You see the open window on the left, you see the paintings, the murals in the back that show the village, and the connection between the people is closer. And it became more of a reconfessionalizing chapel after the renovation. So we can use these models to evaluate sacred spaces that we find in schools and elsewhere. Now, we mentioned the Code of Canon Law that describes quite detailed what kind of activities should happen in a dedicated or consecrated sacred place in a school or elsewhere. Here you see some examples of the activities that are supposed to take place there. Of course, the Eucharistic Mass with communion, the adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, all kinds of sacramental celebrations, the Liturgy of the Hours, the Divine Office, Catholic liturgical prayer service, the Stations of the Cross, Marian devotions, Catholic religious instruction and catechesis can take place there. Group prayer with Catholic content, Catholic choir practice, silent prayer and devotion, Christian meditation in the Catholic tradition, not just any meditation, but Christian meditation, Catholic Bible study, Catholic sacred music performances, or ecumenical prayer services with proper permission from the bishop. So dedicated or consecrated Catholic school oratories or chapels have a clear purpose and well-defined function that allows for little deviation, experimentation, or innovation. The question is whether this suffices for what we expect and hope to expect from a sacred place in a Catholic dialogue school. Because here is a list of activities that would be undesirable or even not permitted according to canon law in a place that is consecrated, that is a designated sacred space, sacred place in a school. Like non-Catholic religious services. Muslims cannot pray in the Catholic school chapel, for example. There shouldn't be any Hindu rituals or other activities. Secular meditation practices or Zen meditation, for example. Academic discussions or debates are not permitted. Film screenings, even when the content is religious. Drama performances or theater rehearsals. You know, we have a canon lawyer in our ECSI team, which is very convenient, and we had a long discussion about sacred places, and she explained that also meetings unrelated to worship and school assemblies, social gatherings and receptions, with or without drinks and snacks, should not take place in a Catholic chapel. They can take place outside of the chapel or in a different room, but not inside. Of course, parties and celebrations, meals, the consumption of food, secular music performances, fundraising activities, political activities, physical activities, or the storage of non-liturgical items should not take place in a school chapel. Of course, we can have another space outside or elsewhere to do those things. So, with all of that in mind, how can we evaluate a Model 1 Catholic school chapel as a sacred space in a Catholic dialogue school?
Well, next, of course, to the canonical objections about certain practices in such a chapel, we have also two theological argumentations that put limits on a Catholic school chapel in this way. The first one is, of course, that it does not allow much of a recontextualizing dynamic, a development of the Christian or the Catholic faith tradition. It's rather slowed down or even excluded. So by insulating Catholic worship from cultural evolution and diverse perspectives, this model risks merely repeating the old recontextualizations that were once life-giving because, for example, a chapel of the 50s was already also a recontextualization for that time. And then we risk that we stop this recontextualization and we are not able to speak to the living faith of new generations in new contexts. That's the first challenge of such a traditional Catholic school chapel. And the second one comes from the other side, namely the perspective of diversity. It's very difficult to justify in a diverse educational context to work with such a traditional chapel if your school population does not only consist of Catholics, but also non-Catholic Christians, other religious believers, and people from non-religious worldviews. So how can a school chapel be inclusive and dialogical when we are confronted with diversity in our Catholic schools? And that's what the next models will look like. A second possible solution or model is to say it's very simple. We don't create sacred spaces anymore at school. They are not needed and they are not desired. Also here we have two different approaches. So the first one is that you argue religion, philosophy of life, that's a personal thing. It's not the school's responsibility. It's something that everyone has to decide in him or herself, and we will not indoctrinate, we will not put pressure, and that's why we will not create new sacred spaces in our schools. You see in the diagram, this refers to secularization and to the colorless school, this model.
Here are some examples of schools that are bare, that are functional, that have a high academic quality, but no sacred space. We call them the colorless school type in the Victoria scale. Here's another renovation project in Flanders. A design studio converted an old church-like chapel that was erected in 1856 into a school for special education, with sport facilities and a media center. They could not touch the outside because it's a protected monument, but on the inside they could renovate and make classrooms, corridors, and a physical education exercise. But the sacred space, the sacred character is gone. The church was deconsecrated and used for different functions, as you can see. All explicit references to the Catholic faith tradition have disappeared.
Now, so such a no sacred space could also be something that happens not by decision, but very slowly, in a kind of slippery slope of gradual secularization. And often you know this, even people in Catholic dialogue schools who are in the management of the school will say, oh, we have no space anymore. We have other priorities. We have to deal with scarcity of financial resources. I'm sorry, we can't pay this anymore. We have to offer all people the same opportunities by the principle of equality. And we should not create big rooms that are not effective, that are expensive, that you cannot warm up, that you cannot clean anymore. It becomes unmanageable. I'm sorry. It's a kind of pragmatic decision by the school management. And often it's motivated even from a Catholic dialogue perspective on the basis of quality. That's why we put it in the, as you can see, in the Victoria diagram on the formally tolerant type of Catholic dialogue school. It's a very dangerous argumentation, but we hear it often in school managements.
There is a slippery slope of secularization. You see an example here that might be acceptable from the point of canon law. So the school needed a space. There was this big chapel available, not used anymore, except by the 5 brothers who still used it for their own liturgy. So they erected a glass wall with sliding doors, dividing the sanctuary from the nave. The brothers still did their liturgy behind the glass, like fish in an aquarium, whereas the school used the big place for all kinds of different functions. So the secular space gradually invades the sacred space. It can get worse in this case, which is a photograph of a church in Brussels. The school nearby needed space to store the bicycles, and a compromise was struck. There were wooden panels separating the liturgical space from the bicycle parking. This goes too far according to canon law. I'm not sure the proper procedures were followed, but that's the reality of gradual secularization.
The critiques on this model, I think, are evident from a Catholic dialogue perspective. First of all, Catholic schools have a pedagogical responsibility for the formation of the integral human person of every student, and this also includes its spiritual formation, and for that you need in some way a sacred space in your school. Moreover, the second challenge is, of course, that sacred spaces are an eminent embodiment of the Catholic identity of the school, and taking it out is like taking out the heart of the school. You could even say that students have the right to have a sacred space in their schools, as a critique on the second model. The third model then goes one step further and say we will create a space, but it should be an empty space. And you can see that we have two subtypes here of this third model. And the first subtype is creating a neutral room. That means a room without a specific content. So the argumentation is here that it's important to recognize that everyone has his or her own personal religion or worldview. The school should remain neutral. It should create a room, but the installation of that room should be neutral. So you cannot put specific expectations to influence people in that room. This comes close to relativism, not to the colorless, but to the colorful school, and even active plural type of the Catholic dialogue school. From canon law perspective, such an empty room should not per se be dedicated or blessed. And so further on, so you create a room, you can see the icon, it is empty. Different people can come in, and they bring with them their different religions and worldviews. They can be moved in and be moved out. So it's the people that are present that determine how the room at some point is organized. But as such, what the school offers is a neutral room without specific references to a particular religious tradition. And we have examples of that.
Indeed, in a Catholic high school in Brugge in Flanders, it's a Catholic high school. They erected a brand new building, and at the top of that is this odd green object, sometimes affectionately referred to as the bird's nest. You have to climb up the stairs all the way at the top. It's oddly shaped. There's an entrance corridor there. If you go in, you come in an empty space. It has some chairs, ambient lighting, it's pleasant acoustics. There's a television screen, a sound installation, but you can do whatever you want there. There's no offering, it's not a chapel, there are no Catholic references. There's an abstract statue, a picture of a recently deceased staff member, but for the rest you can do whatever you want. It's multifunctional and empty. You take yourself into the room, and when you leave, it is empty again. Another example is here in the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. There's a large meeting space available for group use, used for performing art rehearsals in the evenings and the weekends, often used for guided meditation sessions. Muslims use it for praying during the week and so forth. But it's empty. In KU Leuven, we have a number of quiet rooms in different faculties where people can retreat to practice their own religion for prayer, contemplation, meditation. And this university says we are inclusive. We want to welcome everyone, and people can do in our rooms whatever they want. And we will not impose any one particular perspective on anybody. Another beautiful place is the Rothko Chapel in Houston, in Texas, in the US, an ecumenical center, a holy place open to all religions and belonging to none. It's an international, it's a center for international culture, religious and philosophical exchanges, for local performances, and also for private prayer and for individuals of all faiths. You see that the black panels on the wall are actually 14 paintings by Mark Rothko in varying hues of black. It's a contemporary art, but it's empty, and you can use it as you like. Or like this neutral, empty, silent room in a department store in London, where people can take a break from shopping and consuming and take some rest, some private time. You see that the ceiling is still purposefully reflecting the cables and the pipes of the plumbing of the building as a reference to the hectic life outside. Another empty sacred place is the Toronto University Multi-Faith Center that can be used by different groups for different purposes, as you can see. So it's a rather popular solution that you can see in many places. Even here recently I took this picture in the cemetery very close to my home in Flanders, where we have an empty space, the ceremonial space at the cemetery that can be used by different people in different ways. Another empty sacred space. How do we look at this space from the perspective of the Catholic Dialogue School?
Well, it's evident that also here we have different challenges. The first, of course, is that it's not taking stance. It does not have a privileged perspective as the Catholic Dialogue School has. It expresses relativism, pluralism, and potentially also could be a highway towards secularization. That's the first challenge. And of course, the second challenge is that from a Catholic Dialogue perspective, it lacks Catholic identity because the room is deliberately neutral. In contrast to the Catholic Dialogue School, where we have a privileged reference to the Catholic tradition. So we don't think this is a solution for an authentic Catholic school. However, there is a second variant of this model of the empty space. The first subtype was a neutral sacred space. A second one is what we call here really an empty space, but a space that is so empty that it enables the mediation of the transcendence through otherness, through hidenness, and through absence. And you know from ECSI that we have worked a lot around negative theology, meaning that God refers or reveals God's self in its absence, the so-called apophatic theological tradition that concerns or looks to God in terms of otherness, hideness, and absence. And you could also create a space that is empty, but in fact it's an emptiness that invites for fullness. The emptiness itself symbolizes the transcendence. So it creates a space and an experience of silence, of peace, where the dialectic between emptiness and fullness can create possibilities of new revelation to visitors in meditation. You can see on the right side that we have put this empty space, not as a neutral space, but as a space for the breaking in of the transcendence in the quadrant of the Catholic Dialogue School, and even as a form of recontextualization of a sacred space. We have some examples to illustrate this to you.
Here is an odd object placed in the garden of a Flemish Catholic psychiatric hospital. It's ironically called the Chapel of Nothing. It's a black object with a little door right in front of the statue of Mary that is still there. The sisters used to come to the garden to say the rosary on a bench in front of the statue, but now the architect has placed there a special room that is empty. Or is it empty or not? Because there is a hole in the roof where the light and the sun comes in, and the rain and the leaves and the birds. There's this odd black pole, could be interpreted as the wood of the cross, or the needle in your mind, or individuals can come in here, people who are struggling with life, with their identity, with their feelings, with their psyche, and experience in the absence the transcendent. So it's a special place, and it's not neutral, like the first model, but it's an expression of negative theology. So the context does matter if we interpret the meaning and purpose of a sacred space. Or another example, a piece of landscape architecture also in Flanders, in Borgloon, is called the Doorkijkkerk, or the see-through church. Reading between the lines. It's made of metal plates welded together, and you can walk around it partially see through it, see the landscape if you are inside. And it also refers to the church, the actual parish church you can see on the horizon. Has the same shape of a traditional parish church with a cross at the top. So we invite you to be creative and innovative and look for possibilities and think outside of the box. Let's evaluate model 3B.
You have seen in this model, you have in fact a kind of interaction between positive and negative theology. You have seen in the first example that there's a statue of Mary in front of the chapel of nothingness. It's a dialectic between absence and presence. And also in the second example, you see the old church in the village, and you see the new church that is constructed in metal in front of you. So you could consciously, deliberately create sacred spaces in this model 3B that expresses apophatic or negative theology, and it could be valuable and interesting because such an empty space can invite especially also students who wrestle with difficulties, with challenges, with knowing and not knowing, with doubts, with mystery, at a place of silence where they can contemplate and where the transcendence can break through the nothingness and the absence. Of course, we do not recommend this as the only sacred space in a Catholic dialogue school, but it could be interesting also to have such a sacred space next to another one, as we will show in the next models. So here it's not neutrality. Emptiness is in fact a way to open for transcendence by the abundance of silence, if you want. Model 3B. We go now to model 4, and that's what we see happening most of the time in Catholic schools these days. They create one multifunctional space that has room for different religions and worldviews. And again, we have here two subtypes, and the first subtype is that you create one room where the different religions and worldviews can be presented at the same time, simultaneously. So it reflects a kind of respect for religious pluralism, that the different religions are present. Look into the icon, you open the door, and the different particular religious traditions are present with several different installations, but that are using the same space. So in fact, you create a kind of hermeneutical field in which you bring in the different religions and worldviews. It's very close to the colorful school, and it could be an example of values education, but tending mostly towards a form of relativism and even secularization. Jan has examples of this.
Two different kinds of uses. Either you can use it as a multi-faith activity, so people use it one after the next, or together, and we have an interfaith meeting and celebration. I have various examples of this. As you can see here, the interfaith praying room in Newcastle in a secondary school. And you see here the students, each of different religions, practicing their religion, each all together in the same room. Or here we have the multi-faith prayer space in Rhode Island in the US. A retreat where students, faculty, staff, and others are welcome to sit, pause, pray, reflect, meditate, or simply be still, either one or the other, or simultaneously next to each other. There are other examples to be found if you look on the internet. There is a multi-faith meditation and prayer space in a Pacific Lutheran University. We have here in Suffolk University, the Interfaith Center in Boston. There are some curtains separating different sections of the room, but ultimately we are supposed to coexist and share the same space. Also closer to our home, we have the prayer room in the Catholic Hospital of the UZ Leuven, part of our university, the largest hospital in Europe. They have a sacred place that consists of a large central Catholic space with an altar, an ambo, Bible, crucifix, artwork, but next to it on either side, without boundary, there are references and statues and symbols to other Protestant Christian denominations and to Orthodox faith. And in the corner, we have a space dedicated for Muslim prayer behind a curtain, but essentially all in the same room. Now there is some critique we can give on this installation, this model.
Yes, from an ECSI perspective, we think that this model is really not desirable. It's in the colorful corner, as you can see, and you have the risk that you come to a kind of syncretism. That means that you start mixing the different religions and that you do deny, in fact, the particularity of different religious particularism, religious denominations, and that you confuse, in fact, not only those who participate, but that you do not write that it's unjust towards the different religions itself. You cannot just presuppose that all these religions refer in fact to the same, but only through different mediations, because then you start relativizing these different mediations, that for the believers in these religions are not just substitutive by other particularism. So we are absolutely not in favor of blending or combining the different religions in one multifunctional room simultaneously. Okay, there is a solution for that, and that's the sub-model B here. You create one multifunctional space, and then the different religions can come in, can furnish in different ways that one multifunctional room, but successively, not at the same time, but the one after the other. And I think, in fact, that this model is worldwide the most used, also on the long term, because you only need one room, one single room, and you convert it each time to different religious and philosophical needs, depending on who is entering into this room. But it's the one after the other. So it is in fact a kind of empty room, but you can fill it with different symbols, identity markers, depending on who wants to do a celebration of a liturgy. And as I said, it has a lot of practical advantages because it's efficient, one room in the school, and everyone can do with it what he wants, and the room is flexible, adaptable to different needs. You see, it's also the colorful school, but it's also a little bit colorless because the room is itself empty, and it's also a little bit dialogical because you recognize the different religions. But on the other hand, you can see in the Melbourne scale, it's more from values education also in the direction of secularization in our interpretation. There are many examples of such an approach of sacred spaces.
Like this multi-faith space in a school in the United Kingdom, it's called multi-faith space. There are posters on the wall referring to various religions and cupboards underneath, and they are labeled, and each religion in the school has a cupboard, and they can take out the material that they need to set up a sacred space, and then afterwards they put it back in the cupboard, and the next group can arrive and use the same space for their purposes. Or here in a clinic in Abu Dhabi, they have a multi-faith prayer room that has furniture and materials and books that can be used by people with different faith and denominations to do their own religious activities. You can use the cupboard there as an altar. There's a television screen and an audio system. You can adjust the lighting. Muslims can pray on the carpet. There are Bibles and Qurans and other books that can be used. How do we evaluate model 4B then?
Well, also here we are not so enthusiastic, even if it's a pragmatic solution that you find in many places, because of course you risk also here a form of religious relativism, because you really give the idea that symbols are contingent or interchangeable or movable, can substitute each other if required. And it's very important for a sacred space that what is in the sacred space really constitutes the sacred space. And here you see that you just can replace the different mediations. That's first a critique. A second one, of course, is that the Catholic ethos is no longer central. It's like it's reduced to one perspective among others, which is relativism, and which is in contradiction with a Catholic dialogue school that takes the Catholic perspective as privileged. So the problem is also, you show on the one hand as a school hospitality because the others can come in, but on the other hand you keep separating people because one time it's for that group, one time it's for that group, and it's not a very inclusive approach that brings the whole school community together. On the contrary, it's a form of separation of people. It's the colorful type, but it could even end up in the colorless type if you choose for this model 4B, one multifunctional space that you use successively by different religions and groups. So that's the fourth model, one room. Schools are saying, that's model number 5, we have another solution. Let's create different sacred spaces, the one next to the other. So we will not mix them, but we will give the different communities different sacred spaces. Of course, that's much more expensive to do that. And the first model of that is that you present different rooms, each dedicated to different religion and worldview, the one next to the other, and we just treat them formally exactly in the same way. So it means that every room is as big as the other room, and every room can be fully furnished with the objects, symbols, books, decorations, tools that are associated with that specific religion or worldview, and then people can come in and they choose the room they want based on their personal believing style. You have the opportunity to express your personal belief in different rooms with different mediations, which are not mixed, which is an advantage of this model. So you can see the logo on the left side. You enter the room, but it are here 6 different rooms with 6 different separated mediations. Again, if you look on the right side in the Victoria scale, that's a colorful. It could also tend to the dialogue school somehow. But finally, it's also again in the Melbourne scale, values education, the value of each religion, that tends to a form of relativism and even secularization. But many schools are trying to do this, and we have examples of that.
Having multiple adjacent sacred spaces, one for each religion, all of the same size, is a proper solution for a public organization, like, for example, an airport. In the airport in Taiwan, you see a multi-faith prayer rooms for Buddhists, Christian and Muslims to use. Same in Brussels, by the way. There's a famous hallway with doors next to each other that leads to rooms of identical size, one for each of the recognized religions in Belgium. We have one for the Catholics on the left, Orthodox Christians on the right. In the next door we have the synagogue. Then we have the Protestant chapel. Next door we have the mosque for the Islamic prayer. And then the door next to it is the one for moral consultants. So I'm not joking, this is actually, they take this very seriously. And the free thinkers, the liberals in our country, believe this to be the higher model, the highest evolved, where the individual can be truly free and autonomous and not influenced by a childish superstition called religion. So different rooms for different purposes. Some other examples, you see the Haus der Religionen in Bern in Switzerland. House of Religions has Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Alevis and Buddhists, offers their own religious areas in one and the same building, in different spaces in the same building with a central atrium, a meeting space where they can all come together and dialogue with each other and with the public. Or you see here the House of One, which is under development in Berlin, in Germany, which will house a synagogue, a mosque, and a church arranged around a central meeting area. These are just the designs. As you can see, the central meeting area somehow mitigates the critique that the people are separated, but the three Abrahamic religions are together here in one building. Each has their own corner of the building. What do we think of this separating religions in different rooms?
Well, it has some advantages, because in contrast with the model where you bring together simultaneously the different religions, in this model you respect, you even express religious particularism, that every religious system creates its own experience for its practitioners. A disadvantage of this model is, of course, that you separate again people, school members, that's even segregation in different rooms, which of course could be a compromise, but it's not really creating a dialogue among them. In fact, it's more a separation where you tolerate each other more than you get into a dialogue with each other. And from a Catholic school perspective, of course, it remains important that there is a privileged relationship with the Catholic tradition, and that also from a canonical perspective, a Catholic school should also create a room, a sacred space where the entire school community can come together in Catholic liturgy, preferable in a Catholic sacred space. Moreover, it's a quite expensive solution for schools also. That's the reason why some schools are opting for another subtype of this model of multiple sacred spaces, meaning that they create one large Catholic space, but next to that they create smaller rooms for other religions and worldviews. So there's a big oratory or chapel in the middle of considerable size, and next to that the school creates smaller rooms to cater other religious needs, or even the needs of non-believers or non-believing students or staff members. And also for this model that you see shifts more to the middle of the Melbourne scale and shifts a little bit up towards the dialogue school. Also here we have some examples of schools trying to do this.
The Houghton Memorial Chapel and Multi-Faith Center in Wellesley College in the USA is a nice example. Since 1899, they have an historic non-denominational Christian chapel, which is the center of the community life. It's by far the biggest space. And then after a renovation more recently in 2009, they decided to add some additional rooms on the first floor in 2008, called the Multi-Faith Center, dedicated to learning and discovery for all students, place of prayer, worship, meditation, study, and education. It has spaces for a Muslim prayer with ablution stations as well. Separate room for Hindu worship. They have a meditation room, a study, and a central gathering space that can be used by people for their respective religions. So people can separate if they want to in the smaller adjacent rooms and then to come together for the Catholic worship or the Christian worship in the central room. A similar solution here in the Chapel of St. John the Evangelist in the United Kingdom, a central larger Christian space. It is Anglican in this case. And next to it, on the same campus, with the Al-Firi prayer room for Islamic worship, a Dharmic prayer room for the Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh and Jain students. We have a quiet room and a peace garden. So people can retract to separate spaces if they want to. So it is a solution that it's often a compromise, that has some rationale to it, but it's not ideal either from the perspective of the Catholic Dialogue School.
So what is positive about this model is that it respects religious particularism, but I think it's in opposition to a more inclusive approach that is typical for the Catholic tradition. So in the Catholic tradition, we will try to invite everyone into the same space. It's inclusive, and moreover, it's segregational, really literally in different rooms. And that's not compatible with the idea of dialogue school, where encounter and community building are very crucial. Of course, you could say it's a way to show hospitality. At the same time, you show the privileged Catholic perspective by having the biggest room for the Catholic celebrations. But it's possible that on the long term, the inequality between the rooms also can potentially create tension, saying, yeah, we are there, but we are not seen on the same level and to the same extent as the Catholic tradition is doing. So it could create also new discussions in the context of a Catholic dialogue school. That's why also this model, we think, has its limitations. Okay, then we come to the last model, number 6, what we have called a Catholic hermeneutical sacred space, which is our preferential position. The golden dot is there. So it means that you create a single Catholic space, but that is at the same time inclusive and welcoming for a diverse school population. And how does that look like? So it means in the center of your school, you have one sacred space. It's unambiguously furnished in a Catholic way. It forms the heart of the school. It is what we call a hermeneutical space that also will facilitate dialogue and recontextualization of the Catholic tradition. Have a look. It's at the golden dot in the Melbourne scale of recontextualization, and it's on the level of the Catholic dialogue school. It welcomes everyone. It's kat holos. It does not separate. It is universal. Look to the icon. The whole community in its diversity is present, but everyone's identity is recognized and accepted. It's not like in a parish where people voluntarily come. It's in a school where students are studying compulsory with different identities. And of course, in such a school, members that are Catholic can participate fully in prayer and liturgy. And those who have an other belief or an other than belief can be respectfully present. They are invited. It's a hospital room, but we do not expect from them that they participate since they are not Catholics, but come from another perspective. Sometimes they will be able to contribute in some aspects of the liturgy, for example, from their own religion and worldview, but they cannot participate as Catholic. So in that room, it's hermeneutical, it's inclusive, but we will respect and be aware of the diversity of people in our school coming into that hermeneutical space. So on the one hand, it has a preferential option for the Christian story, and that option is professed as testified for the entire community. But on the other hand, it's a sacred space that is aware that not all those who attend are per se belonging to the Catholic tradition. And here we use the principle, the biblical principle of hospitality. Okay, now how does that work practically? So, and that's a very essential point of Model 6. You know, it's think about the PCB scale, it's a symbolical approach. And it will in fact use the versatility, the plasticity or the elasticity of symbols. So very important is that symbols can have different layers of meaning. And many symbols can have multiple meanings for different people and different groups. So what we propose for a school in such a hermeneutical Catholic space is that you introduce universal symbols that at the same time can mediate the particularity of the Catholic tradition for those who are able to recognize it because they are initiated from within in that tradition. So what we propose is that you create in your space clear Catholic symbols that have a universal layer, but at the same time can become transparent for Christ, open for all, and those who are Catholic, who are initiated in the Catholic tradition, can experience through these symbols the presence, also the liturgical presence of Christ. So the idea is that the particular of the Catholic tradition breaks through the universal and can generate different meanings. For Catholics, they will immediately be recognized as Catholic symbols. For others, they can also create meaning, even if the initiation in their religious tradition does not open at that moment immediately a transparency for Christ, since they are not initiated in that Catholic tradition. So it's playing with the different layers of a symbol in such a hermeneutical space. So during assemblies, prayer services, and liturgies at school, we play with that versatility of symbols consciously and deliberately. So what we will also always do is explain to everyone what these symbols mean and what they mediate for Catholics. So, and we will invite as many people as possible to come open for, let us say, the Christological transparency of these symbols, even if we at the same time accept that for some people Christ will not open himself through these symbols, but at the same time they can also have meaning. It's inclusive for other people that are participating in such a hermeneutical space. And in fact, at the same time, what we are doing here is recontextualizing the Catholic tradition in dialogue with the context and with everyone that is present in the room. To make it more concrete, how does this looks like then? Well, we will use, and we have a lot of signs and symbols in the Catholic sacramentology, which refers to universal elements, but have also a deeper Christological layer of meaning. And these are very evident things. Water, bread, grain, food, wine, grapes, fire, light, sun, smoke, incense, smell, oil, ointment, touch, laying on hands, for example. I'll give one example concretely. Grapevine, for example, can refer to wine and the blood of Christ in the Eucharist. But it can also refer, for those who are not believers or not yet believers or other believers or non-believers, to the abundance of nature, to the joy of the harvest, to sharing wine and food in the company of friends, celebration, or the blessings of a good life. So it can have both meanings. So that's how this model plays out.
And we can play with this symbolism and its diverse meanings. So like in this Lutheran church in Finland, the grapevine is very prominent. Against the wall above the altar are the grapes of different sizes with, in golden letters, there are imprints on there that refer to various aspects of the faith tradition. So here we play with this meaning of the grapevine. And it can talk, it can speak to different people in different ways. Yeah, there are many other symbols.
Yeah, these are further examples, of course, of symbols that you could use. They are in blue: a book, a staff, a stone, sand, ashes, glass, air, winds, space, emptiness, nature, green plants, seeds, or the eternal flame, for example, can be another example of an inclusive symbol that has at the same time a very Christological meaning if it's close to the blessed sacraments present in the tabernacle. Also here, I think, Jan, you can give some examples.
Here's some more examples of Mary and baby Jesus. They can be very devotionally Catholic, but also refer to mothers and children in general, to motherly love and care, to fertility. Miriam or Mariam in the Islamic tradition. They can also speak to Muslims among the school population. It's a multi-interpretable symbol, and you can approach symbols in that way. Like the maze or the labyrinth is often used also in Catholic schools in Australia. A universal human symbol of the path of life, in which one approaches one's core via detours, while it also has a particular Christian theological significance in contemplation and prayer. Another example is the metaphor of the tree. Used as a symbol for Jesus Christ since the dawn of Christianity. You can't believe how many trees there are in the Bible. There must be 100 of them. Yet also a universal symbol that can be loaded with significance in many different ways. And here's an example of a small movable chapel. It's non-denominational. The Lilia Chapel in Finland again, where it uses a triangle and a tree as a universal symbol. If I enter as a Christian believer this little room, I'm immediately struck by the tree, which symbolizes Christ for me, but it can symbolize other things for other people and welcome them as well. And the light comes from the outside and giving me the shape of the tree. Or here there is a church on the water in Japan. Nice example of Japanese minimalism in architecture. It looks out through a big glass window through the woods, to trees, to water, with a big cross in the middle of the lake. And it plays with these elements in a very quiet and meditative space. Next to it, close to it, the same architect created the Chapel of the Wind, which plays with the symbol of the wind, which you can feel and sense when you are inside, because you have to enter through this tunnel, which functions like a wind tunnel, catches the wind of the sea nearby. And when you are inside, you sense and hear the wind and the Holy Spirit around you. So this plays with the element of wind and air, as well as light. And here we place with the chapel in the woods. The symbolism of nature is very rich, not just the trees, but also the living plants, the green, the saplings, the insects, the birds, the animals, the life of the forest. Shines through the transparent walls of this Mildred B. Cooper Memorial Chapel. Or closer to home, we have the Sint Lambertuskapel in Heverlee. If you are fortunate enough to attend one of our intensive courses, you will visit this place, which is a former medieval little church in the woods with glass walls. And we also have liturgy. I was married in that place, as you can see, in 2011 with very good memories. But we visit the place with the Australians when we get here for our liturgy. Another example of symbolism that plays out, we have light, a cross made of light in this church in Mexico. You see, it's a modern building, and the architect makes use of the sunlight coming from the outside in the shape of a cross. Light is a very thankful symbol to use. There are many examples of nice places in the world where light is being used, like this renovated church in Germany. In the ceiling we have 3 circles where the light is coming from, referring to the Trinity. But just trying to give you ideas of things you can do with your own hermeneutical space in your school.
This is another example. So this is working with the outside and the inside perspective, with these 3 glass windows referring to faith, hope, and love. So if you're in the church, you see faith, you're a Catholic believer, and that faith is the basis for your hope for the future and for the way that you love. But interesting to glass windows is that you can look to it from 2 perspectives. From the inside perspectives, you have first faith, then hope, and then love. But for people who are not or not yet in the Catholic tradition, you can also look to the windows from the outside. And then, of course, the order changes. You start with love, with human love, as everyone universally can experience. And that could be the foundation for hope, and that could create missionizing, evangelizing, on the long term also Christian faith. So you could have the two perspectives at the same time, depending from where you look to the glass windows. It's a way to show inclusivity in church architecture.
It's worthwhile to focus on symbols, symbolism, and how they work, because you can do a lot with them. Here's an example of fire that is being used in a church in Indiana, in the USA. Here again we have fire in Honduras. Water in Brugge, because close to here, not so far from here, there is a church where they created a water pond in the middle of the church. This is a Maresa chapel in a Jesuit college in Antwerp. It's a renovated chapel that can be used as a Catholic hermeneutical sacred space in a versatility of ways, in different ways. You see also the grapevine, the cross. There's a little statue of Ignatius in the back. The red wooden blocks can be moved around to create several spaces and several opportunities for students to sit. You can have liturgy there, religious education. Here you see symbols are being brought in: sand, wood, stones, a dove, fire, candles, a fishing net, a boat, glass, wishing cards. But of course it was not without debate, or there was a difficult time for the school to come up with this solution, because there were some staff members who did not want to give up their traditional Model 1 school chapel, because they wanted a place to have their Christian devotions during the day. So a compromise was struck, a kind of combination of Model 6 and Model 5B, where they had a little room on the side that was refurbished as a prayer chapel, a little room where they could still retreat and have their own private devotions. But of course, as the years go by, what happened is that the room was no longer used in that way. And nowadays, this photo was taken, I took it recently, a few months ago. It's used to store all kinds of stuff, chairs and books and furniture from the school. So that's what happened after a few years to the prayer chapel. And I don't think that the canonically required procedure was followed in this case, but that's the reality of secularization moving on. Other examples of Catholic hermeneutical spaces in Flanders, the Brothers of Charity created this their house chapel. Here's another picture. You can use it in many ways. It's inclusive and hospitable. The Chapel of the Good Shepherd in Slovenia. Another idea that you might play with, and I know that some of you are already doing that, is the idea of a pop-up chapel, a movable object that can be erected in different places to create a sacredness in different ways with different functions for different moments in time for different people. Like here, the Chapel of the First Examination Round in, this one is called, it's here in front of the central train station in Leuven here. During the exam period, university students can pass by the chapel to light a candle and write a wish on a piece of paper, hoping for a good examination result. And each year, again, the chapel is put in a different place in the city. Or you can even buy one or hire one online, movable pop-up churches that you can use in your school in creative ways. There's so much more you can do than having a traditional school chapel. Or, of course, the magnificent prayer room in the Brisbane Catholic Education Centre that Didier and I were fortunate to visit in 2022, which has the maze at the center, used regularly, daily even, for prayer and meditation and liturgy. With artwork, it has cupboards with all kinds of materials you can use in creative ways. And then, of course, we have to also show you this one. Again, if you're fortunate enough to visit Leuven, we go to the Chapel of Disclosure every time. The De La Salle brothers in Groot Bergade created a renovation project of an old chapel, and it looks like an empty room Model 2. But then you can open the panels, and the original stained glass windows appear, one by one and start to tell their story. And they refer to the Catholic faith tradition, while the light symbolically falls in from the outside in, like God breaking through, filling the room with his stories. There's sand on the floor, as you can see, and you can open these panels or close them again one by one. There are wooden blocks on the floor, like the Maresa Chapel. You can make various setups with big groups, small groups, individuals. You can open the door to the outside, so nature can come in. Again, you see the tree, there is light, there are green things and birds. And then you can open the big panel, and then you see the altar, the original altar that was there. But Professor Lombard, Didier's predecessor, who created this place, couldn't help but insert the interruption in the form of the round stone that is partially covering the altar as well. So very rich Catholic hermeneutical place. People are always astonished when they go there. So let's wrap up. Sacred spaces in the Catholic school.
So we hope we have shown you that there's not one model, there are many models possible with subvariants, as you can see here in the icons again, which shows that the way you construct your sacred space also says something about how you define your Catholic identity and the future of it. And we have clearly indicated our theological preference for one Catholic hermeneutical space. Jan will summarize the 6 models in a dynamic slide, bringing everything together.
So there is some system in this. We followed a dialectic path when we presented to you the different possibilities that you have. And we started with the classical solution of the Catholic school chapel, a mono-religious Catholic liturgical place, confessional or reconfessionalizing. We put it under critique by saying that despite its great function for Catholic worship, it may lack a recontextualizing dynamic of the tradition development. It may lack pedagogical responsibility for other than Catholics who increasingly are present in our schools. There's a risk even of proselytization. And it could be rather limited. We can't do all we would like to do, what we expect and hope to do in a sacred space in a Catholic dialogue school. To avoid these drawbacks, we could radically say, get rid of the sacred place altogether. We don't need it anymore. Could be a conscious decision or a step on a slippery slope of gradual secularization. Of course, that falls under critique as well. There is a lack of integral human formation, and a sacred space ought to be there as the embodiment of Catholic identity and mission. We cannot have a Catholic school without a sacred space, although that will be the case for most Catholic schools in Flanders nowadays. It's not the case in Australia, fortunately. Then what do? We create a sacred space, but an empty one. A neutral room without content, or an empty space that mediates the transcendent through absence. The context matters. You have to look at the whole picture. In the first instance, Model 3A would fall victim to relativism, pluralism, and potential secularization as a missed opportunity for spiritual formation, whereas the second model could be valuable, although preferably not the only sacred space in the school, but nonetheless, the negative theology is interesting. Then, if you don't want to have an empty room, you fill it up with all kinds of different religions. One multifunctional space used by different religions, either simultaneously or successively. Okay, that solves some of the problems, but still there is a risk of syncretism or multi-religiousness. And we warn against mixing different religions together. They will interfere with each other's hermeneutical space and damage each other, all of them. There's a risk of relativism, moreover, and contingency, and the separation of people may hinder the dialogue. If they use it successively, they don't meet in the same room anymore. So then perhaps to avoid the problem of mixing religions, we can have them in different rooms with walls and doors between them, so they're not mixed anymore. We can have multiple sacred spaces, adjacent, all of the same size, one for each religion, or a central larger Catholic space, next to smaller rooms for other religions and worldviews. That solves that problem. But again, another problem arises because we end up in religious particularism and a lack of inclusivity. And again, the separation of people may hinder the dialogue and the encounter that we need in a Catholic dialogue school. Moreover, it is practically and financially difficult to achieve for most schools. In case of 5b, inequality may lead to envy and tensions between people because some have a bigger room and the others a smaller room and others have no room. So there could be discord because of that. Which means we end up again with one room for the whole school community that is this time inclusive, a hermeneutical sacred space that welcomes a diverse school community in the Catholic space. So whereas we started off with model 1, confessional or reconfessionalizing sacred space that is working through Catholic monologue based on literal belief, and having gone through all this path, we end up again in one Catholic hermeneutical sacred space that recontextualizes the faith through dialogue with diversity based on post-critical belief. And that is where you see the golden dot will be located.
Thank you, Jan. So to summarize this again in the form of some conclusions and recommendations, what we would avoid is just a restoration of the past, only serving Catholic students and denying the present diversity. We also will try to avoid a gradual secularization of sacred spaces, which is a big danger in many schools. Avoid neutral, empty spaces. Avoid also multifunctional presence in one room, because that leads to syncretism. You may not merge different traditions, and also try to avoid that you just separate school members in multiple sacred spaces. That's not the way we want to go. So this lecture is an invitation to create one sacred space at the heart of the life and the identity of every Catholic dialogue school. If a principal invites you, it's nice that he starts in the sacred space and that he ends in the sacred space, which is defined as an open hermeneutical space that enables the revelation of transcendence, that has a lot of recognizable and learnable mediations of the Catholic tradition present. So they should be at the same time inclusive, based on the principle of hospitality and the respect for diversity. I think in that way we do justice to a diversifying educational context also in our Catholic schools. And it's the responsibility to have a formation, also a spiritual formation for every student, whoever he or she is. So we invite to recontextualize your sacred spaces, starting from the Catholic faith tradition, and become yourself a member of this dynamic of recontextualization, creating also interruptions when that is possible. Okay, so it asks for creativity and innovation. You have the right to make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but we have to experiment to see how we could be inclusive. We play with, and that's the central message of this masterclass, with multi-layered symbols that are transparent, that are flexible, through which God can reveal God's self, and which can also become transparent for the revelation of Christ. It's important to take into account also the canon law perspective, and there is more flexibility, as we explained here, for sacred places than for sacred spaces. So we have to be aware of that. It remains our task as a Catholic school to explain to all members what these mediations that we often mean, especially from a Catholic perspective, because we may not overestimate the existing confessionality, not only of our staff, but also of our students. And finally, it's important that a sacred space can integrate positive and negative theology. So it's better not to create a separate, empty sacred space, but to include also the negative theology in the positive, that it's a space for presence and absence, for light and darkness, for joy and and sorrow and the dialectic of positive and negative theology. It's important to do that in dialogue with the whole community, listening to the charism of the school, its history, how it's composed, what architectural possibilities you have, and also to listen to what canon law is saying about sacred spaces. And if the management is saying that it's too expensive to create a new sacred space, well, then you have to say, keep in mind, any organization's priorities are revealed by the choice where to spend their money on. And that would be the last idea to finish this masterclass, and I hand over back to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Didier, and thank you, Jan, for sharing your expertise with us in this last hour and a half. And thank you all for participating in this online masterclass. If you have some additional questions or remarks, unfortunately, we don't have any time left to follow up on them right now. However, you could enter them into the chat and it'll get back to you after the class is over. Or you could contact us by email, no problem at all. Also, I'll invite you to share with us after the class any of your own examples that you might like to have for some consideration. Perhaps you have your own example of something that's been completed or an idea that's under development. It's now that you're all a bit more expert trained in the 6 models of this class, you could even already apply the models to your own example and send us your thinking on that, and we'll be happy to have a look and reply to you. Just in terms of follow-up and next steps then, you can all expect follow-up later today, Leuven time, in terms of having the resources from this masterclass online, including a video of the class. As for the question of the next masterclass, stay tuned to the ECSI Catholic Dialogue School newsletter, where you'll eventually see information about the masterclasses in the next academic year. Thank you all again for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you again next time. Have a great evening.